All right, Bellamy, do you want to kick us off?
We're really excited to share this webinar today. So Amanda and I met through a mutual network, and after chatting and networking, we've found some problems that we found that new brands were really struggling with. So that's where the idea for this webinar came from. So as you're starting new product categories and adding them to your brand, how do you do it in a profitable way? This is where I've seen a lot of brands fail and waste a lot of money. So from both of our experiences, we're going to share more strategic way to do it and ways you can test and iterate and plan for expansion down the line.
Yeah, and I would just add, we're excited to like introduce ourselves, get to know you guys a little bit more. Obviously, we have prepared just some information to share, but by all means, we'd love to have this be interactive. We'll take questions at the end, but if there's anything that comes up along the way, we'd love to just have a conversation as we're moving through the slides.
Or feel free to put it in the chat and we can address it as we're going through the presentation or later at the end.
Yep, that sounds great. Well, I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Amanda Rango. I am the founder of ARD Fashion Consulting. I am based in Columbus, Ohio, and I am a fractional product development leader, helping apparel brands build product development systems, sourcing strategies, and operational infrastructure to scale with profitability. So I am definitely the creative side and more of like design and product development.
And then I'm Bellamy Grindl. I'm the founder of Retailytics. For many years, I worked corporate brand side in buying and planning. I've since started my own fractional agency where I do buying and planning for brands, really anything around data and inventory. And I've also started an education arm of my business because I found that there's so many problems that can be avoided that brands really don't address until cash flow is a major issue. So education around how to be more strategic about your inventory investments.
And then essentially what we're here today to discuss is there's four major questions that every founder should answer before expanding into a new product category. So adding a new category can accelerate growth or it can actually create inventory problems. It can give you margin pressure and operational complexity. So today, we're going to show you just how to evaluate a new category before committing to significant time, money, and resources. And through that, we're going to do some slides on how to validate demand before making the investment, how to understand the true cost of a new category, how to plan inventory without overbuying, and how to source and develop products with confidence.
So this is one of not my favorite slides, but one of my favorite slides to share just because so many things can go wrong with product expansions. And I think especially in today's brand environment where a lot of brands start as hero product brands. And so when they're going into new product categories that are outside of that hero product, it's almost like starting a new brand. You need to understand if it is actually additive to what you're already offering, because when you have a more narrow assortment, you don't want the customer to choose between one, they're only going to buy one or two. You want them to buy one and two. And so I'd say most brand expansions fail because they're either putting too much money into it. They're not assessing that what if it fails. I think humans, we're inherently optimistic. So thinking that things are always going to work out, especially from an inventory management side, you always need to have a plan B and a plan C because things often don't go as expected. So from both a financial standpoint, a timeline standpoint, because the biggest thing about making that investment from a cash flow perspective is that it's just eating into your cash flow that you could be buying more inventory of your hero product or, for a lot of smaller brands, that's paying your team. So making sure that you're being really thoughtful about that investment to make sure that it's not sitting there because a lot of brands have expectations about how something will perform and then it won't perform to those expectations. It'll do half of that. And then just the amount of cost that you're investing that is just a sunk cost. So understanding plan B and plan C if things don't go to plan. Mostly the cash flow pressure. And then I think overall the operational headaches of adding a completely new category from the pressure on your team and website performance, and how it impacts overall demand. So here's one I'm actually really excited that Mariana's on. She's a brand that I work with. And so when we go through one of these, if you'd like to share what you're doing with your brand also, but I'm always cautious from a cash flow and inventory standpoint. So I'm like, I want the brands to validate as much as possible before they are adding a new category. So there are a couple of different ways you can do this. One is Shopify now makes this really easy. If you are a Shopify brand, through Shopify Collective, you could actually feature other brands on your website where you're not making an investment in the inventory yet. It's actually just drop shipping from the other brand, and you set that contractually up front. But then there's also things where you can test in really small quantities. I had a brand who, I'm going to give Mariana's example, where didn't really have a lot of cash to expand into a new category. So they took their plain t-shirts and actually did screen printing on them to test graphic tees. And so taking their existing inventory, and then actually when they saw the success of that work, they were able to invest in multiple other screen printing and graphics. And that allows them to utilize their existing inventory, existing colors, but they were able to add 4 or 5 new additional items and plan those drops into the calendar. So it felt like they had newness, but from a cost investment, it was very small, and they could test and iterate and see what would happen. And then I've had other brands where do dyeing testing. So instead of buying a shirt or whatever it may be, apparel item in 5 different colors, buy it in one and do small testing, small batch testing. And then there's also other things where you can test like embroidery or things like that. But one of the biggest things is if you can buy a small sample run or through Fair, or through Shopify Collective, test it in a small way before you're going to write that hundreds of thousands of dollars purchase order. Then you can test demand. Another way that I really like is using your customers as a testing group. So if you have a really involved Facebook community or Instagram community, ask your customers what they want. Your top 10% of customers are really engaged in the brand and they love giving feedback, especially if they love the brand on what you're going to create next. And so a lot of my brands will use that as a testing ground to be like, hey, do we want to launch this new category? Or when we can't decide on a color, we'll actually go to this VIP group and say, what color do you want? And that gives us a little bit of validation along the way before we're making those larger investments.
Bellamy, I'm going to chime in with one more example. I had a recent client that is launching a women's really bright colored athletic wear brand, and she's not ready for the inventory investment. And so her testing ground is utilizing like a POD, a print on demand site. We've done some sample rounds testing the qualities for all of these sites to make sure that, the quality is at least up to par to get the correct reads. But it's really a great way. Her, vision for her brand is all about color and print. So we're still able to create that dynamic, customized print direction, the exclusive graphics, put together robust collections to then test what is the appetite for each of those prints and color collections before we then go and produce it overseas and start building into her business. So that's just another great example of validation.
Yeah, print on demand is a great option, especially when it comes to graphics and brightly colored things, because they can be so hit or miss. I've seen brands that have had graphics do really well one season, they'll tweak one small thing the next season, it's a complete dud. So understanding those nuances and being able to test into it before you're putting money in the investment. Does anyone else have any examples of where you've tested demand?
Yeah, personally, like in my case, because we are very like new age brand and very specific segment. We are selling, I don't know whether you guys have seen it, but more like we are into Indian saris, very specific South Asian community. Challenge with us and how we kind of experimented with demand is our suppliers are more around buying things in bundle colors. So for us, the challenge is we know customer love, like for an example, there's three colors out of six, but we still have to buy the whole bundle from the supplier, and the other three colors are kind of getting wasted. So that's what typically we are trying to optimize right now. I mean, would love to hear your opinion, like how and what ways we can kind of do it at scale, because our challenge more is around because the way saris are being manufactured, it's more and like from supplier side always comes in bundles. So for us, challenges obviously people won't buy the bundles all the time, but um, those colors that are not preferable, that's where we are struggling with financing, and then yeah, inventory investments are going up for us.
Interesting. I'll think about that as we go through the rest of the presentation.
Mhm.
So with cost, one of the things that brands often overlook as a new category's margin impact on the total. So usually you're just doing a penetration analysis to say, if this new category becomes 20% of my total, how will that margin impact overall? And then also just backing into your cost, the target cost you want, because while there are a lot of things that go into the cost, including the tech packs, the cost of materials, the cost of the trims. I'm always telling brands that you should sort of set your target MSRP first. So I'm going to give the example of outerwear because this happened with one of the brands I work with. They wanted to launch outerwear, went through this whole sampling program, product development, design, and made these really amazing outerwear pieces. But at the end of the day, when we actually calculated what we would need to retail the items at in order to make a okay profit even, it was way outside what we thought our customers would pay. So we ended up scrapping the entire project. So if you're able to go in the example of outerwear, say we want the MSRP to be around 350, and then we know our margin needs to be 75 or 80, that at least gives you that target cost to walk into to be like, this is the range I want to look at. These are the fabrics I should select within this range, so I'm staying here. Because some brands will get a little too caught up in the development and choosing luxury, everything, custom fabrics, not stock colors. And then you get to this cost and you're like, well, this is actually way outside of the thresholds that we've set. And then the other thing is understanding your minimum order quantities. So this can make or break a brand, especially smaller brands, being held to these minimum order quantities and making sure that you can, one, move through the units that they're holding you to, but also there are ways in which you can work with your vendor partners if they'll potentially hold a portion of the goods. That way you can, especially if warehouse space is an issue, work through a portion of it before you're getting the rest of it. And then the last thing I wanted to mention on minimum order quantities is making sure, and Amanda, chime in here if you want to give more color. I've had vendor partners actually give a first PO quantity and then a second PO quantity. And so with this brand that had the outerwear example, they would give us really tight minimums on first order quantity and we'd be able to order 50. But then when we went to reorder, they're like, you need to order 500. We would never, at the brand size they were at, we'd never get to that 500 quantity. So there's little things like that where you need to make sure you are understanding what the next step is, because we wanted to order more, but they didn't think through the process of that next quantity. And so we ended up not being able to sell it again, even though it did well.
Yeah, and I would say, that scenario can go either way, just depending on the type of manufacturer that you're working it with, what their setup MOQs are versus reorders. Your hope is that you can, negotiate like the lowest MOQ to test your demand. But, the hope would be you can do a refresh order with potentially less units. So I think it's just really great due diligence to make sure that you're asking those, future state questions to make sure that you're setting yourself up with the right manufacturer that can not only help you with a test order and to gain, knowledge on demand, but that can, help you grow and make sure that when you're ready to do more units or refresh, that you have the right partner.
The thing that I like to tell brands is always assume you're gonna do more. So what are those questions? Even from like SKU setup, don't assume there's just gonna be one SKU of this. Set it up so it's a repeatable process. So if you do scale and you add more, it's easy to add another SKU from. And then also ask the questions if you are gonna scale, so you're prepared if the demand does check. How are we moving forward? This is a big one. So can you afford it? And the way that I look at this is you need to understand that you have enough money and cash flow in order to support your core business. So in larger organizations, we usually reserve about 20% for what we call like play, testing, funny money. We need 80% of our open to buy dollars to fund those hero products that we know are driving the business. And so I think 20% is a good threshold to understand this is my testing. We will lose money on some of this, but some of these could be our next bestseller. And one of the examples I really like to give on this is Urban Outfitters. So Urban Outfitters, obviously a larger organization. I was talking to someone recently who told me this story that they'd give their buyers 20% of their open to buy for funny money, play money to sort of test what works with. And one buyer went out and bought records. And I think Urban Outfitters is now the largest record seller in the US because of that one little test that took off. So, but they still had the money to invest in their things that they knew they were working. So I don't think it's a hard and fast rule, but I think it's a safe rule to say if you're taking 20% of your cost that you're buying inventory for the year and funding that towards testing, that'll at least ensure that you're funding the business in other ways. Because the biggest fail is you get excited about a category, you invest a ton of money in it, but then all of your hero products sell out and you don't have any money left to buy into your hero products. And so then you have all this inventory sitting, and that's where the real problems can arise. Well, actually, one more thing on the last slide.
Yep.
So build a downside case. And like I was saying, I think this is really fundamental to understanding what can go wrong. So in partnership with, usually I'm working in partnership with finance teams to say, what if this goes wrong? What do we do then? So what is the exit scenario? And that can look like a lot of different things for other brands. Either it's selling it at or near cost. You will almost always sell it for more on your website than if you're going to a jobber or off price. And so being prepared to sell it below cost if you do go those routes. But if you sell it at just cost to break even on your website, so you can increase your cash conversion cycle, so you can use that cash for other things. And then the other thing is you need a plan for upside. What if it does check? So where are those drop dead dates to say, I've tested early demand by this date, I need to reach out to the vendor to buy more trims, buy more zippers, whatever it may be, so you can capitalize on it. And there's a lot of websites you can use in conjunction with your website, like Back in Stock, to sort of test demand as something sells out, if people would come back and buy it. I will say, do not plan for 100% of that Back in Stock email sign up to materialize, because that is also a very dangerous position where maybe 1,000 people sign up. If something sold out, I would not invest in the whole 1,000, because some of those people may have moved on, bought what they wanted, traded into something else. So plan for the upside and the downside. So Amanda and I created this risk matrix to look at the different categories in which the lens through which you want to look through category expansion. And usually there's one or two questions that'll put you in any of these scenarios. Between scenario A is that means there's high validation and you've planned for it and you feel like you can invest in it. B scenario, this is where there's low validation. And so there's not that much planning work that's been done. You know the numbers, but there's not actual proof or demand that the customers actually want it. And so that's a cautious stage. Scenario C, this is where there's high validation, but you haven't done your homework in terms of the dollar commitment, the minimum order quantity, worst case scenario, best case scenario, like I just went through. And then danger zone scenario D, this is really, there hasn't been any validation work done, and you haven't done the homework or reached out to your vendors about what the cost investment may be. So if you haven't already taken the scorecard, it'll give you, there are about 5 questions for each of the different sections, give you a little bit, help you zero in on where you may need to focus. And we'd be happy to help you in those areas where it may say that you need more help.
Okay, so step 4 is about like the source or sourcing. Can you produce it reliably? So, a great category idea is only as good as your ability to produce it on time and at the quality that your customer expects. So just kind of jumping into, reliability of your manufacturer, making sure that you're validating, especially if this is a new manufacturer that you're working with to launch a new category. I always counsel my clients on considering the dual sourcing tactics and strategies to make sure that when you're developing a new category, that you're always comparing, costing, MOQs, timelines, all of those major 3 components with multiple, sourcing partners to just give you a little bit of leverage, relativity in your decision making. Making sure that you know your real lead times, always including delays, because whether that's something internal on your team, process decision making, or from a manufacturer factory side, like just always, building in some sort of delay, versus always planning on that like best case scenario timeline. Um, Bellamy mentioned this earlier, but like having that backup plan, that worst case scenario. So if your primary supplier isn't able to deliver, and I think this just loops back up to that dual sourcing strategy, even if you've selected someone that trust and you feel like you can move forward, if something goes awry or, things change with the vendor, at least you have another source that you can hop over to make sure that you're able to actually deliver and test that new product. Locking in
I'll
the quality
actually
can,
jump
yep.
in here and give a story that literally just happened with a client with this. So we had developed a new product category with a new vendor, and reiterating what Amanda said about building in delays, because there are so many variables that can go wrong. But this vendor did not perform to anything that they had promised us. Our delivery was 8 weeks late. And so it was so late, and we didn't plan for that in our other categories, that we actually sold through on most things. They were late. They canceled half the order without telling us and didn't ship like a third of it. So between all of those things, it was actually a pretty big issue that is probably going to cause us to not hit our annual numbers because it was so big. But if we had gone through where we had dual sourced, and we had another vendor partner that we could have jumped to, that could have saved us.
Yeah, that's a great example. I've had many of those scenarios. And I think, yeah, just having that backup option just really helps for decision making going forward. Next thing is around just quality control before goods ship. So again, if you've worked with current manufacturers, you probably have something already set up with them. But again, just doing your due diligence with any new manufacturers, making sure that they have quality control on site, and if not, making sure that you have a third party set up to, help on the quality, especially if it's, you're working with them for the first time. Um, Again, just like reiterating about the MOQs and lead times for reorders. This is just that, future mindset. If things work, then how quickly can I get this reorder? What are the MOQ requirements for that? So the future state. And then lastly is kind of like plan B. Again, like if it's not working, and you need to plan a markdown strategy, how many weeks are you going to read? I don't know if Bellamy, you have any other like tips or thoughts on that, but just making sure that, you're planning for that. If the product isn't working, you have a plan in place for that.
Right. So what I mentioned earlier, there's markdowns, but usually there's a lot of things that I suggest doing before even looking at markdowns. So once you have a product on site, testing different things, it could be the title, it could be the assets, the photography. I had one brand that we launched. We were going a little bit more, it was a maternity brand, going a little bit more into loungewear, or I guess resort wear. They launched a pant called the Fisherman Pant, and it was sort of a high, more women's contemporary brand. And the Fisherman Pant did not sell. But when we changed it to the best vacation pant, or I forgot whatever we changed it to, it sold. So there's a lot of things that you can look at before markdowns. So I definitely say title, copy, assets and photography, and then also just price. I have another brand. We launched some leisure robes at $75. The customer really wasn't responding to that. So we actually changed, it wasn't a hard mark. We just changed the price to $69. And that seemed to do better. Another thing is just changing where it is on the website in terms of collection pages, making sure it's first, making sure you have your cross sells and upsells set up where it's showing up. Sometimes it's just a visibility thing. And then also from a marketing lens, but usually markdowns are my last recommendation before you've tried all those other things.
That's awesome. Thank you.
So here's the exciting one. So if demand hits, how do you scale it? So as I said earlier, I think one of the biggest things is understanding the margin impact of a new category on your business. So I'm going to continue with this outerwear example. If the brand had launched it and it had become a larger penetration to total, you need to think how that margin will impact your overall total. And then also setting up those clear dates to say, okay, maybe I launched it early in my VIP group and they're really, it's doing really well. So where are those dates, and set those out with your team and your vendor to say, okay, we will have early reads by X date. If it hits this target and we think we need to reorder, these are the dates at which we need to write the purchase order, get all the additional trims or whatever else the vendor needs to supply to write an additional order. And then making sure those are all, I think this is a big one, assigning ownership within the team, because usually it's just like it's launched, it's done. You still need all hands on deck to understand once that demand is hitting or not. And again, if you're going to go through those steps to scale it, because you want to make sure, especially in a new product, if it does hit and you want to capitalize on that demand, especially if it's a fashion product and it's very timely, that you won't have a lot of lost sales between maybe when it sells out and then when your new one comes, or if you have things in place to help you capture some of that demand. So one of those apps I mentioned was called Back in Stock, that integrates with Shopify websites. So as things sell out, you can capture email for notification when it's back in stock. I've had a lot of brands also do pre-sale based on things that they've launched. That one is, I've seen it work sometimes and then sometimes not so much. So you have to be a little bit careful with that because if you're doing pre-sale and say your lead time is 3 months, is that person really, because they can cancel it up until it ships. Will that person actually convert, wait the 3 months for when the goods actually arrive? So I think having those discussions and a plan in place are really important, along with the ownership, and people are very clear on what those expectations on who owns what throughout that process. So wanted to flash up our expansion readiness scorecard, and we can all send that in the chat. If anyone wants to take it and is curious about the different questions, it's 25 questions. It takes a couple minutes and it'll tell you if you're not ready, proceed with caution, and there are areas to focus on. And then if you're ready to expand confidently. And so we'd love to get your feedback on it if it's helpful. And then obviously if there's any places where it does say that you need help, Amanda and I are ready to give feedback. So went through this a little bit earlier, but this slide gives you details on what your score actually means. If you do take the scorecard, it will give you results on the page and where you land on the matrix. So we'll send this out so you have it for reference, but I don't think we need to go through it in detail.
Yeah, I mean, now it's just, yeah, what questions do you have? Anything come up that you haven't asked yet?
I'll just say I think it's great. It's great stuff. I mean, we're from the 3PL end, so we end up dealing with this. We deal with a lot of apparel, fashion brands, and it's interesting to see the upfront decision making because we end up dealing with it either as it's taken off, it's a huge success, or it's a flop, for whatever reason. So these are the evaluations that have to have gone on, and then it just relates into the whole operation supply chain category. And Bellamy, Amanda know that well. So I guess you'd want to deal with it here before you deal with it there. And we're just trying to think like the brands we deal with and get as far upstream as we can. And this is very helpful.
And I think one thing that's interesting from a 3PL lens, and I've seen brands do, is launches that are mistakes, they will carry for years. And
Right,
so
exactly.
I've seen brands move 3PLs 3 times with inventory that they have 10 years ago. And
Right.
I'm, trying to build the case that it would be more cost effective to offload that at a discount rather than actually pay the labor for the 3PL each time to move that dead inventory. But dead inventory can be so costly. And as you know, from the 3PL perspective, when it's not moving, you're actually paying, or you're paying for long-term storage.
That's a continuous improvement subject in constantly every QBR, everything. So yeah, it's great that you have this get out ahead of it methodology.
I have a question for you guys on the issue of product naming, and that being, of the many ways that you can see what else would make a product sell. Do you have, sorry about my dog barking, do you have preferred apps that allow you, or other means of allowing you to A/B test product titles on your pages?
So I'm not exactly sure if Shoplift does this, but Shoplift is an app I use for A/B testing that integrates with Shopify. And then I would need to check, a lot of my brands use Rebuy, and I know we can do A/B testing on that, but I would have to verify if we can do product names. But sometimes, I mean, especially for something like that, usually the A/B testing is such a long window, or what they advise you to do is usually like a 6-week test. And so for something that has maybe a shorter shelf life or maybe is more fashion forward, I actually just advise just testing it on, not doing an A/B test, just trying a different one to see if it works. Um, just only because the nature of the brands that I work with are usually fashion, we don't have that amount of time to see a test come to completion.
That's fair.
But I do think thinking about naming a product with, people buy brands and we buy things for the way that we want them to make us feel. So understanding how, I mean, I will caveat this with customers don't read. So sometimes it surprises me on some things when like a name change will actually impact it. But conveying a feeling that, or the person that they want to be in buying that product. I'm curious, Amanda, because I've seen this a lot where brands will actually take the same name that the vendor calls the product, and that fisherman pant is a really good example. That's what the vendor called it internally. And so we just kept the same name. And so I'm wondering if that's something that happens in the design process of figuring out what to name something, because it's like that's what it was called in the PO. What are we going to call it on the website?
That's so funny because I like just cringed when you said you just use what the product name was given by the vendor because I feel like I'm very like meticulous about because of searchability and like SEO, like I'm just so hyper aware of the importance of naming your products, and especially with what you shared about before going through your markdown strategy, like there's so many of those great tips and tricks. And I think that's such a great example of how important it is to like make sure that your naming process is, recognizable, it's searchable. And yeah, the fisherman pant was such a good example. So I actually spend a lot of time on that, and I suggest to my clients. So it's part of like the services that I provide for my clients is I really help them with articulating their product and going through kind of testing strategies and making sure that, the descriptions that they're choosing are going to be very searchable and they're very clear, concise, like it just describes the product easily. So I pay a lot of attention to that, even down to like the barcode level, like the way that they're abbreviating things on, UPC tags and things of that nature, because it's all about the consumer and how they receive it and how they're searching for it. So I think that's a really important, yeah, to think about.
If anyone has other live questions, feel free to shout them out. But we had a couple of starter ones in here that we've heard from people, so wanted to review them. First one is, what is the minimum revenue a brand should be doing before expanding into new category? I don't think there's a really hard and fast rule here. But I do think it's important to validate that demand in some way before adding it. So one of the things that I think is important is, I mentioned this earlier in the call, but making sure that it'll be additive to your order. So if you're adding this new category, your customer will buy it, and so your AOV will go up over time. It won't be a choice where you're just adding your customers like, oh, should I buy a romper or this cami and short set? Well, they're sort of serve the same purpose, so the customer will ultimately likely choose between one or the other. So we want to make sure it's additive to your AOV. And I don't think there is a minimum. I mean, I've definitely seen brands that do hero products that they know the next category makes sense. It just making sure that you're being strategic about how you're adding it, because since cash flow can be such a killer of small brands, making sure you're being thoughtful about it. Second one is, what if customers say they want something, but then they don't buy it when it's available? So this happens a lot, and this is what I alluded to earlier about being really careful about using apps like Back in Stock and assuming that 100% of that demand will actually follow through, especially if it's a seasonal product or people want the instant gratification. They may have moved on and bought something elsewhere, or they may have traded into something else on your website. So in past lives with brands, we would say, I think it would depend on the lead time, but if it was a longer lead time, we would actually say about 15 or 20% of that demand would actually materialize. And then if it was a shorter time frame, if we were able to get goods in to replace it very quickly, we would use a higher percent. But I think it can be really tricky, and this tricks up a lot of brands if you're assuming 100% of that demand that say they want it will actually come back and follow through. Lastly, what margin should we be targeting for a new category? This will likely depend on how big you see that category being as a penetration to the total. So, like I said, a lot of brands sort of don't think about how, as the new category will expand over time, that weighted penetration, how it will impact your total. So, I think usually for D2C brands, I'm saying I want them to target at least a 75 or above. They can go lower if they think the category is going to be a smaller penetration, but that's sort of the range you want to be in, specifically for D2C, given all the costs of everything to be a profitable business.
One that I would add to that as well, that I feel like you and I talked about previously is when you're adding a new category and if it's completely new to the business. So if you're a t-shirt brand and you're going to launch an accessory, or if you're a cut and sew business and you're going to launch sweaters or denim, just making sure that you have the right manufacturing partner, because I've been down the path with many clients that say my manufacturing partner can develop this new category, but at the end of the day, they're not the expert at that product category. So just kind of having that top of mind as you're adding these new categories. Obviously, it's all predicated on what your current product looks like and the category that you're wanting to launch. But I've seen a lot of clients struggle with that. They've seen, great product execution in other categories. And then when they go to add something, their current manufacturer just isn't, the expert in that specific category.
And so a lot of brands will often go with their current manufacturer just because of ease and not wanting to deal with a new vendor. But most vendors have a specialty. So if you're, like you said, launching accessories, that your vendor may not have that specialty. And so the quality of the product, and ultimately you want to create the best version of that product possible. So it's worth doing the homework to look at vendors outside, even though that's probably going to add a little bit more complexity to your plate and your team's plate.
And then we have one more slide here. And obviously, if there's any additional questions, feel free to send us emails directly. But if you feel ready to evaluate a new product category and you would like help from Bellamy or I, we would love just to offer a complimentary 45-minute product expansion strategy session with the two of us to just help you kind of evaluate if you're looking into a new product category before you make that investment, time, money, resources. So during the session, we would love to discuss, just get to know your current product assortment, any growth goals, the category that you're considering, any potential, sourcing, product development, inventory challenges that you're worried about, risks or opportunities that are unique to your business, and then just help to recommend next steps based on your stage of growth. So Bellamy, maybe we just put our emails in the chat. And if you're interested in that, we'd love to offer that to you to just get into more detail for your specific brand.
And then Trag, I did want to address the question you said earlier about some colors not selling as well. I have had clients do mystery bag sales that have done really well for them. So, a product won't be moving on site. We've done everything, the decision tree that I mentioned earlier, as well as markdowns, and people just aren't gravitating towards it. Mystery sales, people love. Like, we could move so much product that way. So Usually, if we have a collection or certain styles that haven't done well, we'll run one of those and it'll help us clear through aged inventory.
Got it. Got it. Okay. I mean, yeah, we will try that. I mean, the challenge has been colors that are working really well, and some are like really not working. So yeah.
Anyone else have any other questions? Well, feel free to follow up. And if anyone takes the scorecard and has further questions, we did drop both of our emails in the chat. So thank you so much for joining today. And hopefully we'll chat soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Ari.
you.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.